WWE Championship. It has endured for nearly 6 decades, viewed by many as professional wrestling's grand prize. A total of 51 men, 53 if you count Ted DiBiase and Antonio Inoki, have laid claim to the title in reigns that vary in length, quality, and overall historic value. Some have accumulated reigns by the bulk, while others enjoyed only a brief moment in sports entertainment's limelight. And then there are those whose reigns were era-defining, owed in large part to sheer duration. 11 men have passed 300 days as WWE Champion, and 9 of them officially pushed past the 1-year mark with the gold. In this video, we're going to scope out the all-time leaderboard for WWE Champions in terms of length. It's a rather unique who's who of promotional history. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic.com, and these are the 10 longest WWE title reigns. Join us! Number 10, Hulk Hogan, 364 days. An emphatic splash from the Ultimate Warrior inside Toronto's Sky Dome put an end to Hogan's quest for a second year-long world title reign. Crap, that's kind of a spoiler, isn't it? Nonetheless, the Hogan sequel was a pretty successful whirlwind run that continued to demonstrate where the power lay in the then WWF. After 14 months without the gold, Hulk picked up where he left off in 1998 without missing all that much of a beat. There were numerous rematches with former champion Macho Man Randy Savage all through the house show circuit, as well as veritable Challenger of the Month clashes on Saturday night's main event, facing the likes of Big Boss Man, the Honky Tonk Man, and yes, of course, we can't forget Hogan's leading man foray as the star of No Holds Barred, an assault on the arts that diminished the global yearning for a standalone Thunderlips movie. This reign wasn't quite peak Hogan, but it reaffirmed who the biggest star in American wrestling was, and the WWF remained viable with the Hulkster on top. Joint 8th, Macho Man Randy Savage, 371 days. Savage's ascension to the WWF throne came on a night in which he wore 4 spangled outfits to the ring in 4 different matches. After the controversial vacancy of the world title in February 1988, Savage joined a field of 14 men in a one-night tournament at WrestleMania 4. In succession, he downed Butch Reed, Greg Valentine, the One Man Gang, and Ted DiBiase to become champion. With the victory came great expectations, though. Hogan was absent for much of the spring and summer, so Savage was being counted on to carry the promotion in a time where drawing on house shows was expected of the champ. All told, Savage, while not quite equaling Hogan-level numbers, was a magnificent draw on his own merits. The Macho Man proved a viable protagonist in rematches against DiBiase throughout the summer, and even for a series of brawls against Bad News Brown. And let's not forget about the heel turn on Hogan to set up WrestleMania 5. Let's just say that that event was the most bought WWF pay-per-view for nearly a decade. Make no mistake, Randy Savage was a legendary champion. Joint 8th, AJ Styles, 371 days. Styles teamed with Savage for a 6-man tag at a TNA pay-per-view in 2004 in what turned out to be Savage's final ever match. As phenomenal as Styles was, even then, few would have ever expected that one day he would tie Savage's greatest title run by winning the same belt and holding it for the same amount of days. In fact, now in 2020, Styles' super reign feels distant, like some sort of hazy fever dream. Styles was really on top for a year plus? Granted, he didn't main event many pay-per-views with the belt. Those final matches were for Lesnar and Reigns, as well as some other eclectic choices. Instead of being the guy, Styles was given an understated but otherwise dignified push as a fighting champion, holding off Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn, Shinsuke Nakamura, and Samoa Joe, with a few forgotten gems in there along the way, like the Last Man Standing match with Nakamura. Fantastic stuff. Maybe it says something about WWE's latter-day disjointedness that AJ's calendar-flipping run as champ on what was then the B brand feels quite secondary. But hey, it sure beats the whole Claire Lynch mess. Number 7, John Cena, 380 days. At Super Cena's absolute strongest, his only apparent kryptonite was a torn pectoral muscle. By this point in WWE history, world title reigns just didn't breach the year-long mark like they used to. In fact, Savage's aforementioned run was the last time it happened. But if someone was going to rekindle the old standard, it was always going to be Big Match Johnny. After polishing off Edge to regain the belt at 2006's Unforgiven pay-per-view, Cena went on a period-defining tear, cementing himself further as the undisputed face of the company. Titanic struggles followed with Umaga and Shawn Michaels, kicking off 2007 with genuine classic bouts. Things got a little hazy with Great Khali and the sort of half-baked Randy Orton feud that incorporated his father, but regardless, Cena endured past the 1-year point. There would have been 5 more days in his total if not for the injury, as he'd have likely lost the belt to Orton at No Mercy Mercy on the Sunday after, but alas, 380 days was enough. His detractors agree. Number 6, CM Punk, 434 days. The inner conspiracy theorist might think this was a make good for bungling the summer of Punk in Clouseau-esque fashion. Can you imagine if Punk's 14-month reign began at Money in the Bank at his most red hot, and he spent the duration turning back every challenger dispatched by The Office? Yes, please. Maybe WWE would be no different today 9 years later, but what ifs are addicting, aren't they? In the years since Montreal, Punk as a top WWE guy has spawned just as much retroactive analysis. For the mega reign itself, Punk found himself in the same boat as Styles, in that his glory took a backseat to whatever the face of the company, in this case John Cena, was doing. There were moments of brilliance therein, however, as evidenced by his rivalries with crazed Daniel Bryan, evil Chris Jericho, and even star-in-the-waiting Dolph Ziggler. The heel turn was mostly unwelcome, but it did give us another classic with Cena at Night of Champions. That brilliance, however, is dwarfed by a simple fact. The mojo captured by Punk a few summers earlier was sadly absent during the reign, and it was not his fault. Number 5, Pedro Morales, 1,027 days. The WWF faithful needed a hero. Sammartino's unfathomable reign, that's another spoiler, but I have my spoiler hat on, don't worry, had been snuffed out by the reviled Ivan Koloff inside Madison Square Garden. To ably slay Bruno is to be as powerful as Thanos, Doomsday, and Bane put together, you would think. But in Sammartino's stead entered Morales, a fighter of similar stock. 3 weeks after Koloff's win, Morales defeated him inside the Garden to usher in a triumphant feeling once more. Like Sammartino, Morales was a champion of the people, selling out the Garden 21 times in 30 title defenses inside the building, and is arguably the biggest Hispanic star in the history of the promotion. Freddie Blassie, Lou Albano, and King Curtis Iakea were just some of the challengers Morales turned back during his 3 years as King of New York. He even fought good friend Sammartino to an hour-plus draw at Shea Stadium in 1972. He may not equal the living legend in terms of overall duration as champion, but Pedro Morales still easily ranks among the Federation's top title holders of the time. Number 4, Bruno Sammartino, 1,237 days. When Morales finally lost the title to Stan Stasiak at the tail end of 1973, Stasiak was merely a vessel. The belt was going back to previous Eternal Champion Sammartino, who had another big run in him. And why not? Sammartino had proven such an incredible drawing card that it made sense for the McMahons to give their trump card another go. Some wrestlers might give their right arm to reign for over 3 years as world champion, but Sammartino, he wasn't keen on the idea at first. In his late 30s at the time, Sammartino was worn down by the wrestling grind and had no interest in being a touring champion anymore. To convince him to take the role, the McMahons offered him a reduced schedule and a much larger percentage of the gate than any wrestler would normally get. It was still far from the absentee champion we see in this day and age, hello Brock, and fans still flocked to the Garden and elsewhere to watch Bruno vanquish the likes of Killer Kowalski, Spiros Arion, and Nikolai Volkov, just to name a few. Number 3, Hulk Hogan, 1,474 days. The WWE we know today has existed in different forms for around 70 years, but to a modern fan, it may as well have been born on January 23rd, 1984. The faint guitar strains of rock and wrestling could all but be heard in the distance as the yellow and red put an end to the Iron Sheik's 28 days as champion. With Hogan at the forefront of the company, professional wrestling was about to change forever. Just as notable as Hogan as promotional Superman was his cadre of arch nemesis, a rogues gallery of supervillains that included King Kong Bundy, Nikolai Volkov, Paul Orndorff, Roddy Piper, and a heel-turned Andre the Giant, just to name a few. Pretty much any heel worth his spit battled Hogan in front of sellout crowds, with Hulkamania a phenomenon like nothing preceding it. For better or for worse, the template of modern professional wrestling was molded when Hogan carried the strap for 4 long years, and despite perception and controversies, his name is forever synonymous with industry greatness. This was the reign that made that so. Number 2, Bob Backlund, 2,135 days. This entry is subject to minor controversy, since one could be technical and say that Backlund actually had 2 reigns during the given time frame. In November of 1979, Backlund actually lost the belt to Antonio Inoki in Japan, though Backlund won it back shortly after Inoki opted to vacate it. WWE's version of history ignores this title switch, presenting Backlund's time as champion as an uninterrupted stretch of nearly 6 years. Backlund defeated opponents the likes of superstar Billy Graham, Greg Valentine, Peter Maivia, and Pat Patterson, but but his reign is perhaps better known for his numerous clashes against outside champions. Back when New York played nice with other territories, Backlund took on fellow world champions from elsewhere, including NWA World Champions Harley Race and Ric Flair, and AWA World Champion Nick Bockwinkel, always going to some sort of non-finish. Backlund sometimes gets dismissed as a meat and potatoes babyface, but he brought the grit when called upon, particularly in brutal steel cage matches for the championship. Long before he became everyone's favourite crazy middle-aged man, Bob Backlund brought the goods as a fighting champion. Number 1. Bruno Sammartino, 2,803 days. What was life in WWE like 7 years and 8 months ago? Well, Monday Night Raw was just moving to 3 hours on a weekly basis, hurrah! CM Punk was not only still wrestling, but he was the champion. Brock Lesnar was only one match into his comeback. NXT had just started as the name of developmental, replacing FCW. Hell, we were between brand splits. Think about the sheer length of time between then and now. That's how long Bruno Sammartino's first reign as WWF champion lasted. His exact number of times selling out Madison Square Garden is disputed, but most put the sum well over 100 different events. More than doubling the length of his second reign, Sammartino turned back the challenges of a rotating cast of maulers that included Gorilla Monsoon, Giant Baba, Bill Watts, and The Sheik, each rivalry cementing him as a cultural icon and sports hero in the Northeast. When he finally lost the belt to Ivan Koloff, the decision prompted disbelief and shock, because nobody thought Sammartino would ever lose the belt. After all, for the best part of 8 years, Sammartino established himself as a true living legend against any and all comers, and will likely forever be the longest reigning WWE champion of all time.